Hey everybody, in this video we are going to take a look at adding audio stems to our click track. Without wasting any more time, let's get at it.
In this segment here, we're going to look at including the split track files into our click track, our overall click track. And these files here were produced by the online tool called Moisis. I'll reference a link below, and we can begin the process here of including our split tracks and starting to line up our click track and including the necessary pieces of the individual stems, if you will. In this portion here, I am simply taking the files that I had downloaded from the Moisis split tracks and am now including them into my Logic project. And in this case here, I want to be able to create new tracks and indicate that all selected files are stems from one project. This will take a little bit of time depending on how large your files are, but essentially what's happening here is the audio files, the stem files themselves, are being analyzed and converted if need be into a proper format to be utilized here inside of the Logic project. All right, so we've got all of our stems included, and the first step that I typically like to do, we'll go through and just rename each of the stems to be something a little more meaningful. And with Moisis, it is something to be noted that they will include a metronome track along with your stems in the event that maybe you don't have a click file. We're going to get rid of that metronome as we have a click that we're going to be working with. And essentially here I'm just going to shrink down the project file, make it a little bit easier to copy the loop of the click track out to the full duration of each of the tracks. The next thing I like to do here is just kind of clean up the icons just to, I guess it's a little bit of eye candy, if you will, to try and find icons that match the different instruments that we'll be putting together in our click track. What we're going to do now is simply just click the top portion of our click and drag it for the duration of each of the stems. And we're going to try and work through lining up our stems to the click track. For this process here, I'm sure there is most likely an easier way to line everything up. For me, I was kind of in a brute force mode of working through Logic Pro and opted to make things maybe a little more difficult than I needed to. And as we'll see here, going through and trying to set up the click portion, making sure it's going to line up with each of the stems. And what I'm looking at doing here is I don't want to start the stems right out the gates, right? I want to be able to include maybe a 4-count click in. And so what I'm going to try and do here is line up the stems in order to give myself that 4-count click. As you can see, I was struggling a little bit with trying to figure out where exactly things should have lined up. And one thing that I will note here as well is that songs typically that are 80 BPM or less, it's typically easier to double the BPM just to kind of give you that eighth note feel in order to kind of keep the groove together. Sometimes that slower click can really seem like it's dragging a bit. And so what I was attempting to do here is to create my 4-beat, my one measure clicks, but while trying to utilize the 80 BPM tempo. As you'll see later on in the next video for adding cues, you'll see that I had actually gone through and cleaned up the click and went away from this quarter system and basically doubled each of the measures so that kind of gives it that eighth note feel, if you will. The next thing that we're going to be looking at here is simply lining up, panning our click and other instruments that we want in kind of that click ear to one side while panning everything else to the left. For me, looking at this video here, I'm going to be creating a drum cover video, and so for me, I'm going to want to have my click, my cues eventually, and drums on the right side while pushing all of the other instruments to the left, so that when the recording is done, you have a sense of the drums that are going to be playing in and being mixed along with the other instruments, while not pushing through the click and the cues and the drums that were already on the track itself. The rest of this video here is going to be a lot of just kind of fidgeting around with the click and trying to get the song to line up properly. And as you'll see here, I'm actually working through and trying to determine what feel I want for that click. Do I want a first click or first beat on the one? Do I want to try and double this? Do I want to try and space everything out? Again, working with the slower tempos can really cause some issues, if you will. It just kind of makes that song feel like it's dragging along. And so the rule of thumb that I've been taught is essentially to try and double the BPM for anything that's at 80 BPM or less. And then that way it kind of gives you a constant pulse to kind of keep things pressing forward. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of push through and fast forward to the end of this video. But if there are any questions, please feel free to leave comments and just let me know what things you may be struggling with or seeing, or anything that you may feel here could be modified to make the whole process overall a little bit more smooth and easy. As I mentioned, I mean, this stuff can get very, very tedious. You can be very nitpicky about things, but you have to remember too, music is an art, right? And so, what's art to one person may be garbage to somebody else. But when all is said and done, if you as the artist are happy with the end result, then I think that's the ultimate way to go here. So, in the next section here, we'll be moving on to adding cues into our click track.